Chapter 6. The Fallen King. The blast from the shattered amulet echoed through the tomb like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the Valley of the Giants. Zareth, the ancient Nephilim king, let out a bellowing roar as the dark energy coursed through him, his body convulsing with unimaginable power. Isaac, Gideon, and Miriam were thrown back by the shockwave, tumbling across the chamber's stone floor. For a moment, the room was filled with chaos. Dust clouds swirled in the dim light, the ground quaked beneath them, and Zareth's monstrous form was silhouetted against the glow of strange, unnatural light. Isaac gasped for breath, his fingers digging into the cold stone as he tried to regain his bearings. Zareth stood tall, towering above them all, his body vibrating with the force of the magic that had been unleashed. His eyes, glowing with malevolent fire, locked onto Isaac, the man who had dared to challenge him. His face, twisted in rage, bore down on them, his massive hands reaching out as if to crush them with a single blow. Isaac scrambled to his feet, knowing that his time was running out. Zareth had been weakened, but the power of the ancient Nephilim was still too strong. His very presence was overwhelming, like standing in the shadow of a mountain that could collapse at any moment. "Miriam!" Isaac shouted, turning to the healer. "We need to bind him, now!" Miriam was already on her feet, her eyes wide with terror, but her resolve unshaken. She began chanting again, this time with more urgency, her voice rising above the sounds of the crumbling tomb. The words were ancient, passed down through generations of her people, a spell designed to contain the uncontainable. Zareth's roar filled the air as he stumbled, his great body crashing against the walls of the tomb. But it wasn't enough. The spell was not taking hold. "Isaac!" Gideon shouted as he struggled to his feet, his sword gleaming in his hand. "We need to slow him down. You distract him and I'll go for the heart." Isaac barely had time to process Gideon's plan before the warrior charged toward Zareth, his sword raised high. Gideon moved with the speed and grace of a seasoned fighter, dodging the massive swings of Zareth's arms as he leaped onto the giant's back. "Come on, you ancient brute!" Gideon yelled, driving his sword deep into Zareth's side. The Nephilim let out a howl of pain, staggering backward. Isaac seized the opportunity, grabbing the remnants of the amulet from the floor. Its broken pieces still pulsed with dark energy, and Isaac knew what he had to do. "Miriam!" Isaac shouted again. "Channel the spell through this." With a nod of understanding, Miriam redirected her chanting toward the fragments of the amulet, the ancient words flowing from her lips with renewed purpose. Isaac held the pieces aloft, feeling the surge of energy building in his hands. Zareth, enraged, reached for Gideon, ripping him off his back and tossing him across the room. The warrior crashed against the stone, groaning in pain as he tried to rise again. But Zareth's attention was now focused entirely on Isaac and Miriam. "You think you can stop me?" Zareth's voice boomed, shaking the walls of the tomb. "I am the last of the giants, the son of the fallen ones. Your world will burn under my reign." Isaac's heart pounded as he faced the ancient king. Zareth's power was immense, and the broken amulet in his hand pulsed violently, as if it could barely contain the forces swirling within it. But Isaac knew there was no other choice. They had come too far to fail now. With a deep breath, Isaac held the amulet fragments toward Zareth, focusing all his energy on binding the Nephilim king. Miriam's chanting grew louder, the air around them crackling with magic. Zareth stumbled, his massive form wavering as the spell began to take hold. "No!" Zareth roared, his voice echoing through the chamber like a clap of thunder. "I will not be bound by the likes of you." But Isaac stood firm, channeling every ounce of his willpower into the broken amulet. The dark energy surged through him, burning his hands and filling his mind with visions of chaos and destruction. He could feel Zareth's power fighting back, a force so ancient and primal that it threatened to tear him apart. Gideon, battered and bruised, dragged himself to his feet once more. His sword was gone, but his determination remained. With a roar of defiance, he charged at Zareth again, grabbing the giant's leg and pulling with all his might. Zareth stumbled, and for a moment, Isaac saw his chance. "Now, Miriam!" Isaac shouted. With one final powerful incantation, Miriam completed the spell. The air around them shimmered as the magic surged toward Zareth, binding him with invisible chains of ancient power. Zareth let out a final roar, his body convulsing as the spell took hold. And then, with a deafening crash, Zareth collapsed to the ground. The chamber fell silent. Isaac dropped the amulet. Sizrenia, его руки опухли и дрожали. His breath came in ragged gasps as he staggered toward Zareth's fallen form. The giant lay still, his glowing eyes now dark, his body motionless. Gideon limped over, his face grim but determined. "Is he—" Isaac nodded, swallowing hard. "He's bound. The spell will hold." Miriam stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "We did it," she whispered. "The last of the Nephilim is sealed." Chapter 7. A New Beginning. The dawn broke over the Valley of the Giants, casting long shadows over the ancient ruins. Isaac, Gideon, and Miriam stood at the edge of the valley, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched the barren landscape. The tomb of Zareth was now silent, its ancient power contained once more. The world had been saved from the return of the giants, but the cost had been great. Isaac stared out at the horizon, his mind racing with the events of the last few days. He had set out to uncover the truth about the Nephilim, never imagining that the ancient giants would still pose a threat to the modern world. But now, standing on the edge of the valley, he knew that the legends were real. The Nephilim had once ruled the earth, and they could have risen again. "Do you think it's truly over?" Gideon asked, his voice low. Isaac shook his head slowly. "I don't know. The Nephilim were powerful, more powerful than we could have ever imagined. But Zareth is bound, and the prophecy is fulfilled." Miriam, standing beside them, looked at Isaac with a soft smile. "You did what you set out to do. You stopped him." Isaac sighed. "For now. But the world is full of ancient mysteries, dark forces waiting for their chance to rise. This may only be the beginning." Gideon grinned, despite his injuries. "Well, if more giants decide to wake up, you know where to find me. I think we make a pretty good team." Isaac chuckled, the weight of the past few days starting to lift. "I suppose we do." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the three of them turned and began their journey back to civilization. The Valley of the Giants faded into the distance, a place of ancient power and buried secrets. But the threat of the Nephilim had been stopped, at least for now. As they walked, Isaac couldn't help but wonder what other ancient forces might still be waiting deep beneath the earth for their chance to rise once more. Chapter 8. The Rising Shadow. The sun had long set by the time Isaac, Gideon, and Miriam reached the outskirts of Jerusalem. The city loomed ahead, a bastion of civilization against the wild, untamed lands they had left behind. The journey home had been uneventful, but Isaac couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at the back of his mind. Something was wrong. Zareth was bound, but the ancient power they had disturbed still lingered, like a faint echo of something unfinished. They entered the city just before midnight, slipping through the quiet streets toward Isaac's small house near the temple. The flicker of torchlight reflected off the ancient stone walls, and the only sounds were their weary footsteps. After days of grueling battles and near-death encounters, Isaac wanted nothing more than to collapse into his bed and forget the horrors they had faced. But as they approached the front door, something strange happened. Miriam, who had been walking a few steps ahead, stopped suddenly, her body tensing. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Isaac's heart sank. He did feel it, a faint, unnatural tremor in the air, like the distant hum of some hidden force. Before he could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. The tremor was slight at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew stronger, rumbling through the stones beneath them. Isaac's eyes widened in alarm. Gideon drew his sword instinctively, his eyes scanning the surrounding shadows. "What now?" he muttered, his voice edged with exhaustion and frustration. A chill ran down Isaac's spine. He had felt this sensation once before, back in the Valley of the Giants, just before Zareth's awakening. The air had the same oppressive weight, the same sense of impending doom. But Zareth was bound. The spell should have held. What was this? Without warning, a deafening crack split the night, and the earth beneath them buckled. The ground heaved violently, sending them all stumbling backward. Isaac grabbed the edge of the doorframe for balance as the street in front of them split open, revealing a gaping fissure that seemed to descend into an unfathomable depth. From the darkness below, a low, guttural growl echoed up from the abyss, a sound so ancient, so primal, that it seemed to shake the very air. Isaac's breath caught in his throat. He stared into the pit, eyes wide with horror. "No!" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It can't be." Before anyone could react, a massive clawed hand erupted from the fissure, grasping the edge of the street with enough force to crumble the stone. The hand was monstrous, its blackened skin covered in jagged scars and strange, glowing symbols. The sight of it froze them all in place. A second hand emerged, pulling a hulking figure up from the depths. The creature was enormous, easily as large as Zareth had been, but different. Its eyes burned with a fiery red glow, and its face was twisted into a snarl of pure malice. It was covered in thick obsidian armor, and its movements were slow, deliberate, as if it had been locked away for centuries, waiting for this moment. Isaac's mind raced as the creature hauled itself out of the fissure and stood to its full height. This wasn't a Nephilim. It was something else, something older. His stomach twisted as realization dawned on him. The Fallen, one of the ancient beings who had descended from the heavens to mingle with humanity and give birth to the Nephilim. Zareth had been their offspring, but this creature, this was one of the Fallen themselves. "Isaac!" Miriam's voice snapped him out of his shock. "What do we do?" Isaac swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had no answer. Zareth had been a nightmare, but this was something far beyond what they were prepared to face. The creature let out another low growl, its fiery eyes locking onto them. For a moment, it seemed to study them, as if weighing its options. Gideon, ever the warrior, stepped forward, sword raised. "Get behind me," he ordered, his voice steady despite the obvious terror in his eyes. "We've faced giants before. We can take this thing." But Isaac knew better. This wasn't a giant. This was one of the original Fallen, a being whose power dwarfed even that of the Nephilim. "No, Gideon!" Isaac shouted, grabbing his arm. "This isn't something we can fight." But it was too late. The creature moved with terrifying speed, its massive hand shooting forward to strike at Gideon. The warrior barely had time to react, raising his sword to block the blow. The impact sent him flying across the street, crashing into a wall with bone-jarring force. "Gideon!" Miriam screamed, rushing to his side. Isaac's heart pounded as he watched the creature step closer, its eyes fixed on him. It was like looking into the abyss, endless, dark, and full of malice. The Fallen were not like the Nephilim. They were the source of all that was wrong in the world.